let's go. So welcome to the 8th hearing of the Public Accountability Committee's inquiry into the appointment of Mr John Barilaro as Senior Trade Investment Commissioner to the Americas. The inquiry is examining the circumstances leading up to the appointment of the various commissioners, including the processes, probity and integrity measures undertaken. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today we'll be hearing from one witness, Mr Paul Webster, Trade and Investment Commissioner, UK and Europe Investment New South Wales. I thank Mr Webster for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, the House has authorised the filming, broadcasting and photography of committee proceedings by representatives of media organisations from any position in the room and by any member of the public from any position in the audience. Any person filming or photographing proceedings must take responsibility for the proper use of that material. This is detailed in the broadcasting resolution, a copy of which is available from the Secretariat. While parliamentary privilege applies in New South Wales to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. And if witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want more time to respond, they can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing. I now welcome Mr Webster as our witness for today. Mr Webster, could you please state your name, the capacity in which you are appearing today, and swear either an oath or affirmation from the cards that have been emailed to you by the Secretariat? Mr Webster, sorry, you're on mute.
Paul Webster, Trade Investment Commissioner for New South Wales, UK and Europe. And the affirmation is, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr Webster, and I'll just take this opportunity to thank you for agreeing to appear today at what is a difficult time difference for us to have managed over the last few weeks, and I understand it's 9 p.m. From where you are appearing from today, and it's 8 a.m. obviously our time. So it's the best we could do, so thank you. Would you like to start by making a short statement for the committee?
No, I have no statement.
Okay, no short statement. We'll go straight to questions from the opposition. Mr Daniel Mookie.
Thank you, Commissioner Webster, for joining me. You can hear me clearly?
Very clearly. Mr Webster, I don't have the title. Mr. Mookie.
Oh, that's okay. Well, thank you, Mr Webster, for your appearance this morning. Mr Webster, can I just establish some preliminary details, if that's possible? You are the Trade and Investment Commissioner, UK and Europe, are you not?
Yes, I am.
And you've been in that position since March 2022?
That is correct.
What were you doing prior to that?
I led a consulting business that I founded when I relocated to the UK, and it continued to lead that business in providing services in economic development to national and regional governments across UK, Europe, as well as agencies in Australia and New Zealand.
Okay. And prior to that, did you work for the Department of International Trade in the United Kingdom?
Yes, I did, and in Australia.
And in Australia. So you worked for, was that DFAT or Austrade or?
As you can appreciate, many different names in government, but originally UK Trade and Investment, that then became the Department for International Trade.
Okay, and
originally actually the Foreign Office Director.
And what did you do there?
In Australia, I was the Director of Australia and New Zealand, bringing Australian and New Zealand companies to the UK to expand globally, and then later set up my business to consult to them to support global business across all sectors and markets to come to the UK.
So you were effectively working on inbound foreign investment into the United Kingdom from the Australia and New Zealand region?
Not primarily, and originally yes, but my remit became much broader than that.
And how long did you do that for?
With the British government from 2012 through to about 2020, yes, about 8 years.
Okay. And were you also at that time Director of the Institute of Economic Development?
I was at that, yes. For some of that time, not all of that time.
So, Mr. Webster, is it fair to say that you built a career out of international trade?
I call myself a deep general manager in that part, where I did focus my career in the latter half into international trade and investment.
And you have a lot of experience in working on inbound and outbound foreign investment. Is that fair?
Expertise is a strong word, but I'm certainly very experienced, yes.
And you effectively were doing that for the UK government for nearly a decade, it's fair, before this job.
And other clients, yes.
And in that role that you did for the UK government, you acquired a good and solid understanding of both Australian and other international businesses?
Yes, and the competitive landscape in which the governments must operate.
And as well, you would have acquired quite a good understanding of the challenges that businesses would face if they decided to invest in the UK, and equally the challenges UK businesses would face if they decided to invest in Australia.
Yeah, it's a global market, and understanding business is very important.
And this is perhaps one of the reasons why you felt that you may well be an appropriate candidate for the Agent General position to the United Kingdom when you made that application?
Absolutely, yes.
Can you?
And I will point, and other candidates as well. Many of my peers are also of the same calibre, and I, in fact, actually saw myself as competitive, but also nominated other people as well for the role who I believe would be fit.
Of course, Mr. Webster. But we might just concentrate on your role and your qualifications, if you don't mind. Can you tell me, when did you first develop an interest in becoming the Agent General to the United Kingdom?
When I was made aware in very late 2019.
And you made an application when the job was first made available towards the end of 1920, is that right?
It's almost 3 years ago. I couldn't give you specifics, but roughly around then. I think the general excitement in the UK that New South Wales was coming back on the global stage was a very exciting opportunity, and excited to see that it was potentially going to be back in the market. It is government. I don't think anyone rests on that necessarily would be come to life in what time frame, but at the time, yes, very excited by the opportunity.
Why did you want to be the Agent General?
It's an incredible opportunity for what New South Wales is in the global stage. We are certainly been underweight for who we are and what we represent in the Australian economy. And there is so much opportunity. It's a great product, and the product being the third of the Australian economy inside Australia first and foremost. We're an international audience, so you have to talk about Australia. But in that, it's a great product. People, look at my background. You don't need to say where we are. It's very clear where we are. We've got a fantastic product, a great ecosystem, a large, diverse economy. It's a product the world needs. We need our talent. We need our natural resource. We need our people. And I can see that what the UK and Europe needs and what we have to offer, we're going to be a great match, and it would be a fantastic opportunity if I was fortunate enough to be in that position.
I should have asked you, Mr. Webster, you're from New South Wales, are you not?
More recently, I was actually born in Western Australia, but I migrated in 2004, and my family and myself are from there. I met my wife there, my 3 children were born there. I proudly wore the New South Wales colours running for New South Wales. So yes, I very much consider myself a New South Wales.
So thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, can we just establish some facts around the application? And I appreciate that, of course, I just want to be clear that we do appreciate this, your appearance, and we'll treat with some sensitivity the issues surrounding the application as well. But you lodged an application towards the start of 2020, or when the job was first advertised, that's correct?
Yes.
And you participated in what we now understand is the first selection process, that's correct?
I believe so, yes.
And you made it through to the shortlist of that first selection process, did you not?
Probably. I have to again go back to the 3-year time period and the global pandemic that landed in that time. So we do have to take things with a little bit of pinch of salt in that the first process, if it began when it ended, I couldn't actually be very clear on that. Certainly when COVID struck globally, the UK border shut hard on the 23rd of March. Any conversation or any progress at that point became effectively mute.
That's fair, Mr. Webster, and we will be in a position to clarify soon with you some of the dates around this, but I just want to be clear that you lodged an application in the first instance, and and you're quite right to point out that that was interrupted by the pandemic, but you were both long-listed and shortlisted to the best of your recollection, is that correct?
Certainly long-listed and shortlisted, I would hope so. But again, you'd have to speak to the people running the process. I can only assume yes, because where I am today.
And Mr. Webster, you had the opportunity to meet with the selection panel for the first process, did you not? And participate in an interview with them? And the only people who were able to participate in that interview stage were the people who were shortlisted, which you may not be aware, so we can infer that... Yeah, we can infer, therefore, that you were shortlisted. You did participate in that selection process that was at that time run by MGS Global, did you not?
Correct.
And at that time, were you aware that NGS Global's client was the New South Wales Treasury?
I was aware it was the New South Wales government.
Okay. And you are right to say that the process was interrupted as a result of COVID?
Substantially, to the point I believe the role might have even disappeared for a period of time, as far as I'm aware.
That's true.
Obviously, the public had this attention to more important matters.
That's true, Mr. Webster, it did. And the process was restarted to the best of your recollection?
Yes, I believe it did restart, but we ran into the same issue with Omicron.
Indeed.
On the global stage.
And the process restarted in effectively towards the end of 2020, around October. Is that sort of accord roughly with your recollection?
I believe it was resurfaced in the end of 2020, but unfortunately my more powerful recollection is being returning to lockdown. I was actually in Kent and we were one of the first regions to go into a very hard lockdown in the second wave. So unfortunately my memory was more has more focus on what was actually impact on rather than the specific dates.
That's okay, Mr. Webster. Not much.
Sometime late in Q4.
Yeah, that's certainly adequate, I guess, for our purposes. And I appreciate that the UK was in its second lockdown at that time. But you did relodge your application and express again your interest in becoming the Agent General to the United Kingdom?
I believe the application carried on. I don't recall filling out paperwork.
That's right, Mr. Webster, sorry. But you did reaffirm that you had an interest in continuing in with your application.
Yes, I was asked if I still had interest, and absolutely.
Yes, and that was conversations you were having with Dr. Broadbent at NGS Global?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Can I just, do you, by Mr. Webster, happen to have access to the documents that we've emailed you?
I do.
Can I just get you to turn to page...
Which documents are
it's what you should see as Tender Bundle 001, 28, 10, 22 at the bottom, and at the top it should just say Webster.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, you've got that?
Yes.
Do you mind if you don't mind, turning to page 3?
Yeah.
Just tell me when you're there.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Thank you. Mr. Webster, you would not have seen these emails, just to be clear. Or there's no basis for which you to have seen these. But these just might help us with some dates, if you don't mind.
No, cool.
You could just see here, this is an email which Dr. Broadbent has sent to the Deputy Secretary of New South Wales Treasury, who's her client, which is Miss Jenny West. And it's an email which I'm starting on the only email on the page which is clearly identifiable, which is on Wednesday the 2nd of December 2022, 4:34 p.m. Do you see that email?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and you can see here that there's a highlighted section.
Yes.
It says here, Jenny, greetings. As per our discussions in relation to round 2 of the sourcing, research and interviewing for the Agent General role, we've attached the final list recommendations. The key recommendation is that Paul Webster is the strongest candidate. He has a highly relevant background for the role, the right level of experience, a very good mix of commercial and government experience and strong networks in the UK and Europe. You can see that?
Yes.
Yeah. And just to the last, the penultimate paragraph there, just under all the dot points, you can see Dr. Broadbent says, we've maintained contact with Paul throughout the year to keep him in the candidate pool. He remains keen, but will need a decision soon due to the nature of the business cycle and some major pending work in the UK. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
That
Yes.
presumably is reflective of your requirements at the time?
Yes.
Yeah. But you can see here, at this point in time, from at least the 2nd of December 2020, you are the key recommendation for the Agent General role. That's a fair reading of that? You would agree?
You're a smart man, Mr. Mickey. I'll take it on as read.
Thank you. Do you mind just turning forward a page? To page 2? We're just going to go up the email changed.
Yes, understood.
You can see then what happens after that is Miss West that emails Michael Pratt, who is the Secretary of the Treasury at the time. And you can see that this is an email which is at 7th of December, so it's about 5 days later, 5:59 p.m. You can see Miss West goes to Mr. Pratt, Mike, as discussed, please find attached the final recommendation in regards to the New South Wales Agent General role in London.
Yeah.
I have interviewed Paul Webster, who has very strong with deep trade investment knowledge across both UK and Europe. You see that?
Yes.
Presumably you did have a conversation with Miss West? Do you recall?
Yes, we had a teleconference.
And in your view, did you interview well?
I believe so.
Fair enough. As it seems Miss West does too. But you can see that as of 7th of December 2020, Miss West as Deputy Secretary's recommendation to the Secretary, who notionally at this point in time is employer, is that you're the final recommendation. That's a fair reading?
Yes.
Just go up, if you don't mind going up to the page. Just into the middle email. This is an email which is sent towards the end of that week, which is the 11th of December 2020. You can see again, Miss West says to Mr. Pratt, Mike, further to this email, Paul Webster is now the final preferred candidate. We have conducted reference checks and they are outstanding. You see that?
Yes.
And then you can also see that I think Miss West is contacting Mr. Pratt's EA or someone who's responsible for his diary and says, can you please let me know when Mike might have time for a quick phone call with Paul in the UK? Yeah, just going up the page.
Yes.
You can see that this person's EA responds by going, Mike can do a 7:45 a.m. Chat for 15 minutes on either the Tuesday the December 22nd or Wednesday the 23rd. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. So we can establish from this email chain that you are recommended by the recruiter. You then interview with Miss West. You put in a strong performance which leads her to consider you to be a very strong candidate. You become the final preferred candidate on the 11th of December 2022, and
Yes.
a conversation is arranged or is meant to be arranged between you and the Secretary of the Treasury, and that's all
Yes.
takes place in 2020. Can I ask you, did that conversation with the Treasury Secretary take place?
I honestly can't recall. I don't. I honestly can't recall.
Do you recall just a couple of days prior to Christmas having a conversation?
As I said, in the view of what was occurring, I don't have I can't recall. I certainly don't. I believe I remember if I spoke to Mr. Pratt. I believe because we were again in UK national lockdown, I'm not 100% sure, just in the sense of pragmatic family times, in the sense for the UK it was a very sudden lockdown, that last one in December. I can't recall if I actually did have that. I generally have no information on that. If I did, I can't recall that conversation.
That's okay, Mr. Webster.
Yeah, I think if there was, it would have only been a phone call. I don't have a recall or record of that.
That's okay. We might be able to assist you, Mr. Webster, in your call.
Just when you say you don't have a recall or a record, does that mean you have checked your records in relation to that?
No, just I have no recall of it.
Yes,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
That's okay, Mr. Webster. We might be able to assist. Do you mind turning to page 17 of that tender bundle?
Yeah.
So we have moved forward a bit in time to Wednesday, the 23rd of December 2020. And this is an email chain that is starts with a correspondence from Dr. Broadbent to Miss West again.
Yeah.
Just going down the bottom, you can just see here, Jenny and others, just a quick note to update you on a couple of things. AG London, Paul Webster. Paul was very pleased with the session with Mike P, and Paul understands the time frame. I think hearing from Mike that he was the preferred candidate was great. Paul also shares with Mike that he knows HC Brandis, which I think is a reference to High Commissioner George Brandis, despite the spelling, and also expects the people in the UK government who need to give the OK know Paul too. He understands the time frame and is okay with that. Do you see that?
Yes.
So I think we can infer from that you did have a conversation on the 22nd of December at around 7:45 a.m. Sydney time with Mike Pratt. And
It looks like that.
yeah, and do you recall having a conversation with Dr. Broadbent afterwards?
I do remember a phone call with Dr. Broadbent, and that's all very positive information. I think what's not stated there was the message from Dr. Broadbent was how many steps were still required. So it was hard to say that the role was signed, sealed, delivered, because certainly there were still many, many steps to go in approval. That's absolutely
true, Mr. Webster. There's no doubt about that there were many more steps to go. And it's to be clear here, I don't think anyone is suggesting that an offer was made to you at this point in time. But do you recall the Secretary telling you that you were the preferred candidate?
I actually can't recall the phone call. So, and again, as I said, probably more to the fact of the broader requirements around dealing with family and friends at that time. Mr. Pratt is a very experienced executive, and normally I would have thought I'd certainly remember a call with Mr. Pratt. For some whatever reason it is, I don't recall that phone call, but I don't argue that it may have happened.
That's okay, Mr. Webster. Of course, it's near Christmas and you're in lockdown at this point in time, and it's been a long process here.
Yep.
But certainly there's a contemporary record from Miss Broadbent in which she says that Mr. Pratt did say that you were the preferred candidate and you welcomed this news. I presume you would have welcomed the news if you... That's probably fair. Yeah. Yeah. And also, when Dr. Broadbent says that you understand the time frame, that's basically a reference to what you just told us, which is there were many more steps to come.
Yes. Congratulations. There's still many steps to go.
Yes, but to be fair, I can only imagine the Secretary of the Treasury, who is your employer, telling you you're the preferred candidate would have given you at least some comfort to persist in the process. That's fair?
It's fair, but I've also worked in with government a long time, Mr. Murphy. So I also, when I hear the number of steps involved, I'm positive, I'm optimistic. However, any good negotiation opportunity is never locked and signed until it is finalised. So equally, I didn't stop marching on with my own business and my own priorities whilst waiting for government to complete the process.
That's fair enough, and reasonable for a person in your situation as well, Mr. Webster, just to be clear here. Do you mind just turning forward a page to page 16?
Yeah.
Just sort of work our way up the email chain again. We now return basically to the 14th of February 2021, and this is a effectively everybody comes back from holidays. But you can see here that this is, again, not an email that I would have expected you to see, but effectively the people in Treasury are trying to action the next steps that you made reference to. Start down the bottom here. You see that in the last, one of the paragraphs it says here, I know, well, I'm talking about the email that is Thursday the 14th of January 2021 at 5:22 p.m. right down the bottom. See that?
Yeah.
I've just been careful not to name names unnecessarily, Mr. Webster, as well. Yeah. You can see in the fourth paragraph here, you can see here that there's at least some reference here that says, I know this timing will affect Paul when he's able to give notice to his current employer, but at least the meeting with Mike went well and he gave Paul some certainty and made him aware of and comfortable with the timeframes involved. You don't have any recollection of that conversation, but that's a record that was made by a person within Treasury, at least as to what they understood. That's a fair reading?
Yes.
Just going up.
The timings required, certainly the ones I was told were longer than what's written there.
It's fair enough. And to be fair, if we go up a paragraph, we might find ourselves in a position where that clarifies itself. You can also see here that this HR person in Treasury goes, we're currently arranging for the meetings with the Premier, the Deputy Premier and the Treasury ahead of the next Cabinet meeting on 1st of Feb so we can hopefully put his nomination up for Cabinet approval on that date. As we've already noted, after that there will probably be another 6 weeks or so of the process to go. You see that?
Yes.
So that's, to be fair to you, Mr. Webster, that's just basically accords with what you said, which is there was many more steps to go. But the next step here was certainly the Treasury's understanding at this point in time was that you were to potentially meet with the Premier, the Deputy Premier and the Treasury ahead of a meeting in 1st of February as well. That was your understanding of perhaps where you were in the process at that time?
Not all at once. I believe it was clear the hurdle with the Treasurer, then you'd move up ranks subject to their clearance at each level.
Yeah, that's fair as well. Can I just take you forward now to page 9, if you don't mind, of the tender bundle?
Yeah.
We're going to go back in time as well to the 22nd of December 2020, just to pick up on where we were with that potential conversation with Mr. Pratt. You can see here that this is an email that Mr. Pratt sends to Miss West at 9:50 a.m, which I think is about an hour and a half after your conversation with them. You can see here that Mr. Pratt, within an hour and a half of meeting with you, says to Miss West, "Hi Jen, please now move ahead with Paul. Great that he is still very keen." You see that?
Yeah.
After Christmas, first interview with the Treasurer, then Premier and Deputy Premier separately in whichever order you can arrange. Please ensure that you advise DP, which is Deputy Premier, that we have a strong candidate and are lining up for him to meet early next new year. You see that?
Yeah.
And then you see down the bottom in the last paragraph, this may all take approximately 2 to 3 months, so time not an issue given Paul's current commitments. And also High Commissioner comments about mid-year announcement. Let's see how all of this goes, but we may well be into April before all this is done. So perhaps he starts quietly with big announcement in July, ? Also, Treasurer may want to be in London for the announcement, so with COVID, etc., who knows at this point. Also, can you start looking at REM, which I presume is remuneration package? You see that?
Yeah.
So at this point, within an hour and a half, the view of meeting with you, Mr. Pratt confirms you as the candidate and describes you as very strong, and then he flags effectively what you just described, which is first you'll meet with the Treasurer and then you meet with others. That's fair?
Yeah.
Then, if we don't mind, just turn over to page 10.
Yeah.
I'm skipping over some of what takes place, but you can see here as well, this is an email which Mr. Pratt sends to Miss West on the 28th of December 2020, 3 days after Christmas of that year. And you see Mr. Pratt says, "Thanks, Jenny. next step, brief to Treasurer and set up interview towards the end of January on his return. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And if you just go down as well, you can see as well that Mr. West is responding to an email he was sent the day before he was meant to meet with you, in which Miss West has flagged the advice that she intends, or at least the Treasury intends, to give to the Treasurer. And you can see, just that if you go down the recommendations for the Treasurer, it says here, number 2, advise if the Treasurer, Premier, Deputy Premier request to speak to the preferred candidate, Mr. Webster, prior to his announcement going to Cabinet. You see that?
Yes.
So again, at this point, there's no ambiguity from at least the Treasury perspective. You're the preferred candidate and you're meant to meet with the Treasurer, Mr. Perrottet, towards the end of January. That's coming from the Secretary. Were you aware that this was all being organised at around this time?
I believe the next steps were in motion, but I never ever received a request to meet with the Treasurer or the DP or the...
Well, we'll get to that shortly, Mr. Webster. But now that you've flagged it, did you ever actually meet with the Premier? Sorry, the Deputy Premier, Mr. Barilaro?
No.
Did you ever meet with the Treasurer, Mr. Perrottet?
No.
Did you ever meet with the Premier Berejiklian?
No.
Were you at all contacted or attempted to meet with them at all?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you have any contact with any of their staff?
Not to my knowledge.
Uh,
As in, I believe it was either through Dr. Broadbent or through the HR teams involved in government, but it was certainly not to my knowledge I ever had any interaction.
I just want to be abundantly clear about this before we turn to that part. You had no recall whatsoever, or you never did meet with, have any contact with, conversation with either the Treasurer Perrottet or his staff, or Deputy Premier Barilaro or his staff?
Never.
Okay. I might pause there for 5 seconds to see if my colleagues have any questions before we move to the...
Yeah, I'm all good.
Can I just ask, were you given an explanation, given that these steps had been outlined, as to why that didn't occur?
Given the global context at the time, I didn't really... It had happened previously to run and sit this, and given where we were in the world, I didn't see it any differently to the previous time. So, again, I wasn't overly concerned, and equally, as I said previously, worked with government long enough to say when you're giving quite a long list of hurdles still to go through, I wasn't holding my breath either. So I had a job and a company to run, and I made sure that had my full focus as well.
Mr. Webster, you're describing your reaction, which sounds like quite a reasonable one. My question was, were you given an explanation for why those interviews didn't proceed?
I'm not sure I asked for them.
Thank you.
Just before we leave this part of the story, Mr. Webster, can I just take you to page 11 of the tender bundle?
Yeah.
Just to clarify that this is accords with your recollection. Just in terms of the bottom of page 10 over to page 11, Ms West tells Mr Pratt what the recruitment process undertaken for the UK Agent General role was. And she just makes the point, I won't go over it at all because we've established a lot of this anyway in this inquiry, but you can just see that on the third point, Ms West says that a panel was convened to interview 7 candidates, 1 candidate withdraw. The panel was led by Michael Pratt, Secretary, Treasury, with panel members Tim Reardon, Secretary, Department of Premier and Cabinet, Kim Curtin, Interim Deputy Secretary, New South Wales Treasury, and the Honourable Warwick Smith, Chairman. You see that?
Yes.
Did that accord with your recollection of who exactly interviewed you, or the selection panel was?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So,
with Dr. Broadbent in attendance.
yes, with Dr. Broadbent, that's fair. But basically, it's a pretty high-level panel. It's the Secretary of Treasury and DPC, amongst others, which are the 2 most senior, well, at least 2 of the most senior bureaucrats in the state. You'd agree with that? It's pretty high.
And 2 very established business people as well. So yes, I remember it very good.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think we will now move to just exploring that question as to whether or not meetings were required to be held with various ministers. We might start with the Deputy Premier, Mr Barilaro. So again, your recollection is that you never had any contact whatsoever with Mr Barilaro?
I honestly I have no recollection of ever meeting or conversing with Mr. Barilaro.
Or his office?
If they were in his office, I didn't know if they're in his office. At that point, I'm dealing with the recruiter or the HR team and its people. So, again, not directly, indirectly potentially, but certainly not to my knowledge.
Now, just to be clear, you have no specific recall of having contact with a senior advisor by the name of Joseph Brayford?
No.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Can I take you to page 21 of the tender bundle?
Yeah.
So, we'll join the story at this point. Again, everyone is basically returning to work as well. And I just want to be clear, Mr. Webster, I have no expectation that you would have seen this email or be aware of it whatsoever, just to be clear as well. But you can see here that this is an email that Mr. Brayford, who is described as a senior policy advisor to the Office of the Honourable John Barilaro MP, sends to Miss West, the Deputy Secretary, on Friday the 15th of January 2021. You see that? Just by way of context for you, Mr. Webster, at this point in time, the project to appoint the UK Agent General is being led by the New South Wales Treasury, and Mr. Barilaro is a Trade Minister who is supported by the New South Wales Treasury at this point in time. It's prior to the formation of the Department of Enterprise, Investment and Trade as well. So that's by way of context. You can see here Mr. Brayford goes, "Hi there, apologies if this is a Friday memory dump. However, there are a few things on my mind and your email earlier prompted me as well. Can the below please be followed up? Don't need to worry too much about the Vietnam appointment." But you can see here Mr. Brayford says, "Details for the Agent General appointment. If a candidate has been identified, I would like their details. Timelines. The Deputy Premier approved the amended timelines attached and kept an eye on things. He was disappointed when Treasury brought the initial delay to his attention, and I fear slippage from the already delayed timeframes is occurring." Do you see that?
Yes.
So you can see here that Mr. Brayford is telling the Deputy Secretary at Treasury that he has an interest at least in who the Agent General is going to be and if a candidate has been identified. And you can also see that he's apparently, the Deputy Premier has told the Treasury, or at least the Deputy Premier at this point in time was apparently disappointed that there's been some slippage in the timetables as well, none of which I expected you to know. But if you go forward a page,
Yes.
you can see here that Miss West responds on the 18th of January, 3 days later at 2:43 p.m. Effectively, it's a Friday memory dump that is met by a Monday response, is the way I infer. But you can see here, can you please, that she asks, I think, an assistant or someone else involved in the process within Treasury, can you please, and she sees Mr. Brayford, can you please schedule a time with Joseph for the Deputy Premier to meet with the proposed candidate for the UK Agent General role? Also, she tells Mr. Brayford, Joseph, just so you are aware, they will also be meeting with the Treasurer and the Honourable George Brandis. You see that?
Yes.
Just going up, Mr. Brayford responds a week later at 11:59am on the 25th of January, which is one day prior to Australia Day. You can see, "Hi Zali, Jenny, we're going to be very limited with the Deputy Premier's availability over the next few weeks. Further, can we get a resume and supporting documents prior to landing a time?" You see that?
Yes.
So clearly the Treasury does take steps to facilitate this step, including contacting the Deputy Premier's office, which, to be fair to them, also want to be involved. They ask for a list to go over of who the candidates are, and a time is being moved to set up. And that's as of 25 January as well. We might just keep continuing with this email change. Can you turn to page 19? We'll go forward to page 19. You can see as well that this particular person at Treasury responds to the request of the Minister's office to get access to the information around the Agent General search And this person says, "Hi Joseph, lovely to hear from you. Hope this email finds you well." Describes the process. Treasury engaged NGS Global to conduct executive search for the New South Wales Agent General, and the panel has now concluded the interview process and are recommending Mr. Paul Webster for the review and endorsement. They send across your resume, your job description, your interview notes. Ms. Harrison also goes, "I'm hoping to be able to narrow down more precise window of availability over the coming days, but happy to be guided by yourself on the Deputy Premier's availability. The candidate, Mr. Webster, is UK-based, so hours are sometimes tricky, but Mr. Webster is very accommodating. Please let me know if there are any dates you would like to explore with Mr. Webster." I presume you can see that?
Yes.
Just go up, you can see Mr. Brayford's response, which is wonderful. "Thank you, Zali. I will get some times for the Deputy Premier to meet Mr. Webster. However, to assist, would the mornings be best for him? We do not want to offer times that would be unreasonable for Mr. Webster." You see that?
Yes.
That entire email change from the 25th takes place over 3 hours, from the 11:59 to 2:20. So it's quite clear that the Deputy Premier's senior advisor seems to think that they're going to have a meeting with you. But you're absolutely confident no such meeting ever took place.
Not that I can recall.
So, look, it's not apparent to us as to what happened, which meant that Mr. Barilaro never met with you as well, given that they took an interest in the role, they got access to your CV, they confirmed that they wanted to meet with you, but then, according to your evidence, the meeting never happened. And I don't expect you, Mr. Webster, to be in a position to explain that, but I just want to ask you now, against for the fourth or fifth time, just to be abundantly clear, there was no contact whatsoever with you and Mr. Brayford or any other member of the Deputy Premier's staff?
Certainly not to my knowledge, and certainly not the names you've mentioned. No.
So, Mr. Webster, other evidence that's been introduced to us suggests that roughly a week after this period of time, the Deputy Premier, for whatever reason, starts to have conversations with the person who ends up as appointed as the Agent General, which is Mr. Cartwright. Now, forgive me, I don't think we've had a position to send you this email because that error is mine. But we have an email from Mr. Cartwright to Mr. Broadbent that says that at the same time the Deputy Premier wasn't meeting with you, he was apparently talking to Mr. Cartwright. And apparently the Deputy Premier was asking Mr. Cartwright to consider the role in early February, roughly proximate to the time that Mr. Brayford was trying to organise a meeting with you. I presume you weren't aware of that?
No.
And I presume the reason perhaps you weren't aware of that is because, as Ms. West has made clear, and as Ms. Harrison has made clear, the official process is by far, well and truly, application process has concluded by this point in time. It's not like the job is open for people to continue to apply. That's fair?
I couldn't comment. It's not my side of the equation.
But Mr. Webster, you might not be in a position to comment on this, but I want to put it to you so you at least have the opportunity to give a response. It looks like you're pushed aside for no reason whatsoever as the Deputy Premier decides to headhunt Mr. Cartwright on his own volition.
And I can't comment on a part I'm not a party to.
And it looks as though, despite you being considered a strong candidate, recommended by the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of DPC, you're shoved aside by the Deputy Premier without even having the opportunity to contact or speak with the Deputy Premier. Is that a fair characterisation of events?
I can't comment on it. Yeah, I was an applicant in a competitive process. There were still many steps to go. There was a lot of things happening in the world at that time, and it's also talking about Australia Day in the view that Australian business pretty much closes to the beginning of February. There was any delays such as the ones you've shown me wouldn't cause any alarm to me at the time, and it's a competitive process. And as I said, there were many steps and a long time frame to go through. So at no point would I have taken the role for granted.
And Mr. Webster, to be very clear here, at all points in time, you've conducted yourself impeccably. And at all points in time, you've conducted yourself fairly and with tremendous humility, to be fair, to be frank to you, certainly the impression you're giving me, Mr. Webster. But it looks as though you were knocked out of a competitive process by the Deputy Premier because fundamentally he wanted to give the job to someone else. Do you wish to respond to that?
It's the choice of the New South Wales government. I'm
Fair
very
enough.
pleased with the role I have, and it's an honour to serve New South Wales in the role I'm doing.
Indeed. In respect to, we might leave the Mr. Barilaro aspect of that and turn now to the Treasurer, Mr. Perrottet. Again, did you have any contact with Mr. Perrottet or his staff?
No,
Do you have any specific recollection of speaking to a person by the name of Charis Ombiko?
it certainly doesn't raise any recall or any memory for it.
Do you have any recollection of having a conversation with any person by the name of Brand Black?
Nothing I can recall.
Okay. And certainly not with Mr. Perrottet himself.
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you mind turning to page... We'll kick this one off at... Let's start at page... I think we can start at page 31, if you don't mind, of the tender bundle.
I have it.
Just down the bottom here again, this is an email which I've taken to you to before, but it's appearing now in a different email chain.
Okay.
Ms. West is it's the 11th of January 2021 email in which Ms. West makes clear to this person who's clearly assisting with logistics that that the next steps at this point in time is for you to meet with the Treasurer and the Deputy Premier as well as George Brandis. You see that? By the way, did you ever meet with Mr. Brandis?
Not in this capacity, no.
Okay, thank you. And then you can go up just to this response as well. You can see right up to the very top, you can see that this person is actioning Miss West's request to establish a meeting with the Treasurer. It says here, I've been patiently, hi this person, thanks for following up, you didn't miss an email. I've been patiently waiting for the Treasurer's office to get back on deck so they can advise the best time and date to meet. The Treasurer's EA has returned from leave today. You see that?
Yes.
And you can see as well that this person is setting out the reasons for why there is some urgency. As per my correspondence to Jenny on December 22nd, the preferred timeline for these meetings is Treasurer, then Premier and Deputy Premier. Once the Treasurer has earmarked a date, I'll then look to schedule the others as to not mess up. That accords with what you described as the sequence, which was Treasurer first, and assuming that no objections were raised by the Treasurer, you'd go on to meet with the Premier and Deputy Premier. But you can see why, from their perspective, it was important to get a date with the Treasurer because they couldn't action the meetings then with the Premier and the Deputy Premier. Is that fair? Yeah. So you can see as well that that's taking place on the 18th of January 2021. If you don't mind turning now to page 29,
Yeah.
you can see as well that when this person is saying that I've been patiently waiting for the Treasurer's office to get back on deck, they're waiting for a response to the email that they sent on this page, which is on the 12th of January as well. So on the 12th of January, this person has contacted an advisor in the Treasurer's office by the name of Charis Ombiko. I don't know if I apologise to that person if I've mispronounced their name. But you can see this person says, hey C, Happy New Year, hope you managed to have a wonderful, well-deserved break. Treasury engaged NGS Global to conduct executive search for the New South Wales Agent General, and the panel has now conducted the interview process and are recommending Mr. Paul Webster for review and endorsement by the Treasurer, who at that time is Mr. Perrottet. Please find attached resume of Paul Webster, job description, interview notes. Can you please let me know if the Treasurer is available to meet with MS Teams with Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster is UK-based, so hours are sometimes tricky, but Mr. Webster is very accommodating. You can see that it's basically the same email that's sent to the Deputy Premier's office a few days later. but it's the first recorded time that we can establish in which Treasurer Perete's office is informed directly that you are the preferred candidate. That you're the recommended candidate, at least. Do you see that?
Yes.
Just going up, on the 25th of January, Mr. Umbiko responds. He CCs Mr. Black, who I believe at this point in time is the Treasurer's Chief of Staff. And he goes, before proceeding to scheduling an e-meeting between the Treasurer and Mr. Paul Webster, the Treasurer has requested a short list of the other candidates that were interviewed together with a copy of their resume. When this info is available, could you please send to me and I'll forward to the Treasurer for his attention. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So, from what we can infer, actually, before I come to that, I might just finish this email chain. So, 25th of January 2021, 6:19 p.m, the Treasurer's advisor is saying that the Treasurer himself has requested a short list of other candidates and won't yet agree to a meeting with you until he's had the opportunity to effectively have a look at that. Is sort of the inference that I reach. And if you just go up, page 28,
Yeah.
you can see that the Treasurer is requested for the short list of the other candidates is indeed supplied. You can see that this person says to Mr. Umbiko and CCing Mr. Black, Jenny West has kindly sent through the attached emails with details for the recruitment agency, NGS Global, including the shortlist. So they actually do send across all the other information. And then it doesn't look as though any response comes forward from Mr. Umbiko or Mr. Black. And so on the 9th of February 2021, you can see as well that there is a response there. I just wanted to check in and offer my assistance with getting this interview meeting in the calendar. Please let me know if there's any details. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it looks to us as though the Treasurer asks for the other shortlisted candidates and then is doing this somewhat in parallel to, or at least in the timescale, seems to be doing this in parallel from at the same time Mr. Barilaro is recruiting other candidates to the role. Certainly it looks to us as though, far from keeping himself distant from this process, the Treasurer is quite involved. He's requested a short list of other candidates as well, and is at least wanting to inspect it with a view that he'd like access to all the information. And I'm only pushing this point because it doesn't look as though any contact then takes place between the Treasurer's office and you whatsoever, which accords with your recollection. That's fair, Mr. Webster?
The last part I can answer, the other part I can't comment on, but the last part, no, I wasn't contacted.
So again, the inference that, and again, you might not be in a position to comment on this, but I'm going to put it to you anyways to give you the opportunity, but the inference is, again, is that the Treasurer doesn't engage with your candidacy for reasons that are unknown to us, despite you being recommended by his own secretary. Do you wish to comment on that?
I have no comment.
Okay, that's fair enough. So the only reason I raise that is because, again, in another correspondence from Mr. Cartwright that is sent as well, and to be fair, we will have the opportunity to test some of this with Mr. Cartwright as well. But Mr. Cartwright is mentioning the fact that there is some form of an arrangement between Mr. Barilaro and Mr. Perrottet to support his candidacy as well. It looks to us as though, Mr. Webster, you were the successful candidate in the official process, but you were felled because there was an unofficial process taking place at the same time.
All I know is it was a competitive process and the process hadn't been completed. So in that view, it is, from my point of view, I was one applicant in a competitive process and it wasn't completed, and it was in a very intense time and continuing element of the world pandemic. So, again, I don't really have a comment other than it's a competitive process.
Okay, I might just pause there and just ask my colleagues if they have any questions before we move to, I guess, what the final part of the questioning that I would have.
Mr. Webster, were you given any explanation about the order of interviews that was originally proposed, that you see the Treasurer first and then the Deputy Premier and the Premier?
I believe it was just the government trainer come up.
It does seem unusual, though, that the first meeting wouldn't be with the Trade Minister.
I believe at the time the global was in PNC, and again, is the customer, potential future employer to make their decision on how they go through the recruitment process. It wouldn't certainly not be for a candidate to be questioning her process.
Yes, I definitely agree with that, Mr. Webster, which is why I asked the question, were you at any point given an explanation about that order?
No, but nor did I see.
Thank you.
We're due to break at 9, so did you want to take 5?
If we take 5 minutes, I imagine we're only going to require 10, 15 minutes left with Mr. Webster after that.
Do you want to take 5
Yeah.
now then?
Mr. Webster might need a break too.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Webster, we're going to take a 5-minute break now, so we'll come back about 2 to 3 minutes. We'll come back. Is
3:09.
let's say 3. Let's say 5:09. Thank you. We'll come back at 5:09. 5, whatever that is, your time. 10:05, is it PM? Is that what? All right. We'll be back in 7 minutes. See you then, and shouldn't be too long after that, is what I'm hearing. Yeah. Thank you. Back live, Mr. Webster. Are you with us?
I'm reading it, Billy.
Okay, great. We'll go straight to questions again from Mr. Mookie.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I promised we won't need too much more of your time, or at least I won't. But Mr. Webster, you make the point that around February 2021, there were still many stages to go as well. But
Yes.
you did commence conversations with Dr. Broadbent, according to Dr. Broadbent, about your remuneration and other sort of requirements around transition, did you not?
My personal recollection of that was it was a confirmation of information, not a negotiation.
What information was confirmed?
To not waste anyone's time, for example, pragmatic elements, salary ranges, for example.
And do you recall when in time this confirmation of information was provided to you?
No, I can't. I'm sorry.
Was it around February 2020?
I think
2021,
actually,
sorry, February 2021.
One of the things I had to clarify was my current employer at the time, we have quite a substantive notice period. I needed to also understand that if that was a problem, then that would take me out of the running as well. So that was also a two-way sharing of information.
Okay. And when did those conversations cease?
From my recollection, the Omicron element sort of, I felt in my own personal situation, have brought it to certainly a close or a very long slowdown. So I can't give you a specific date, I can't recall.
So when were you told that you were not to become the Agent General?
I think it was many, many months later.
Was it April that year?
Possibly later.
Who told you?
I believe Dr. Broadbent.
And what did she say?
I believe another candidate has been chosen. There's still opportunity to work if I was interested. Of course, very proud to serve New South Wales and obviously still interested. So, yes.
And just stepping that out, so Dr. Broadbent told you that another candidate was selected?
I believe the phrase was agent general, but yes.
And again, do you have any recollection of when in time this conversation was had with you?
It would have been that conversation that I previously just read.
Okay, so either April, May, around that period, April, May, June, 2021.
My best guess, yeah. It certainly, it was only about around March, Easter that we saw that Omicron wasn't as potent as the previous versions, or certainly with the vaccination. So it was sort of around the world economies opening back up a bit.
Were you surprised to be told that another person has been chosen as the Agent General to the UK, despite the Secretary of Treasury and others informing you that you were the preferred candidate?
As I said, it was a competitive process, and it was far from a complete process in my eyes. I was told there's still many steps to go. So, surprise might be a strong word. I certainly wasn't shocked.
And did Dr. Broadbent indicate to you at all the reason why the other candidate was selected?
A high calibre Agent General had been identified and was successful in the competitive process.
Did Dr. Broadbent indicate to you that that person was effectively nominated by the Deputy Premier?
Not sure if that information was shared. I doubt it was. It would have been irrelevant to me.
And did Dr. Broadbent provide you with any other feedback about why your candidacy didn't ultimately succeed?
I believe it was a accompanying comment, such as I was a very strong candidate, however, an exceptional candidate had been identified.
And you were then given the opportunity to apply for the role that you currently have?
I believe so, yes.
And then you ended up taking that role?
Yes.
Okay. And can I just look again? Charles, got
just on that, and that offer was made in that conversation, was it, Mr. Webster? Was that at
No,
that
I
time
believe
or
it
later?
was subsequent. I believe it was subsequent. I think the first one was a call, but something like there might be other opportunities to explore, and then another conversation, I believe, occurred. I don't have it on formal record, but I believe it was, you're a very strong candidate, they're still very interested in you, but the Agent General role is going to another high-quality, high-caliber candidate. There might be other opportunities, and I believe there was the second phone call linked to that.
Yeah, and that was a phone call from Dr. Broadbent.
Correct.
Yes, thank you. And you referred to, at one point in that discussion, you referred to yourself as a strong candidate, but then there was an exceptional candidate, another person. Was that?
It's how I recall the conversation.
Yeah,
So
those.
are my words and my recollection.
Yes, okay, thank you. Turning to my colleague's question, though, were you really given any reason at this point? I'll just press you on that. Were you given a reason in that first call by Dr. Broadbent as to why you were not selected?
Yes, I answered that question.
Are you suggesting that the reason was the other candidate was a higher quality candidate? Was that the reason conveyed?
I believe so, and that would make sense in a competitive process, yes.
And were you named, was the candidate who succeeded at that point named?
Not to me, no.
Thank you.
Can I just, I guess there's, Mr. Webster, again, the final sort of line of questioning I have. In respect to what you describe as the confirmation of information around the conditions of the job, you decided that wasn't a negotiation on your part. What did you mean by that?
You have to offer to negotiate against or with something.
So you were seeking information about what the role's conditions, remuneration and timelines would be?
Just to understand it with, well, first and foremost, that I wasn't going to create a problem within the process in the sense of the notice period is substantive and I need to pass that on, because if it was, I had an active job underway and I didn't want to jeopardise that. Secondly, it is in any recruitment process, you don't want to waste either party's time, so you need to know you're roughly in a ballpark.
Okay. after receiving that information, did you feel that the available conditions and remuneration were within your expectations?
That's it. That's the procedure.
Were they creating any difficulty in your ability to accept the job?
Depending on the terms and conditions and requirements of the role, it could have, but as it stood, it was enough to proceed in the process. And as I said, there was no offer to negotiate with at that point in time.
Fair enough. I'm just going to ask you a few questions around whether or not, only in order to establish effectively what was the expectations, or I guess, more to establish the conduct of the New South Wales Treasury in this process than necessarily your own, please. Mr. Webster, so please don't infer from this line of questioning any inference about you. This is more so we can establish a baseline in order to assess the conduct of the Treasury and the department thereafter. Were you seeking remuneration of between $800 to $1.2 million for this role?
Was I seeking?
Yes. No?
That certainly wasn't a question before.
No. And were you seeking an agreement in which the New South Wales government would meet the cost of your accommodation in London?
It would purely depend on the requirements of the role. So it wouldn't be out of the question to be looking at that depending on the demands and requirements of the role. For example, I'm here at 10:30 or 10:15 on a Sunday night. There are no trains for me to get home. If that was a standard requirement, obviously that needs to be addressed in some form. So again, it depends on the requirements of the role that you secure and the elements to execute those roles and responsibility as in any job.
Of course, Mr. Webster, but you weren't actually seeking it at that point in time as a prerequisite for your continuing in the interview process.
The description hasn't been described, so I can't demand something I haven't had slightly.
Sure. Were you at all insisting on New South Wales government support to meet cleaning expenses for homes and the like?
Again, an offer hadn't been put down. There was no roles, responsibility, activity defined to then require my lifestyle may or may not require at that time. So I think I see where you're going with the questioning, but again, you have to put me over that conversation. There is no role description. There's no description of activities. There are no clarity on the demands of the role. So without that information, I can't.
I appreciate that, Mr. Webster. Maybe I should rephrase. Was it your expectation that the role would come with the cleaning expenses of your home met?
It was, again, the demands, the roles, responsibilities, activities would determine what is required. And it is something I can only answer if I see what my demands, activities, interests and objectives are in that role.
But after you received the confirmation of information, or at least the information that you
had saw. It was very, very high level. So it's not to contradict Dr. Broadbent. I think it's just a different choice of words to describe what it was. But so a negotiation has to have received an offer, and there was no offer received. So
just to be clear, Mr. Webster, I'm not asking whether you sought this. I'm asking whether or not, even at this point in time, it entered your mind to seek it, or whether this was your ability to obtain these conditions.
It was a much higher level conversation. It wasn't granular.
And I've only got two more, I guess, on this line. Presumably, in respect to the ability to, was it a reasonable expectation that you may have had at that time that the government would assist in meeting the school fees of any children that you may have?
Again, demands, activities, requirements. If I am expected to travel frequently, and I'm not around, then would I need to put children into boarding school, as an example? It's a question I hadn't got to because of the granularity. I think if we look at Sydney and I think we've got more consular generals than any other city on earth, and you'd have to look at, there's a very good standard guide of what would be required in that role. again, each role is specific of each government across its objectives, its relativities of the activities, its breadth of travel, its breadth of reach. So I really can't comment. We didn't get to that level of conversation. Sorry.
But just to be clear, in the information that you were provided, no reference was made to the New South Wales government.
So again, it was a very high-level conversation. There was no granularity in it, so there was no way to determine the needs that would be required by my family in that role.
Indeed, Mr Webster. I'm just, I guess, more focused on what information New South Wales Treasury disclosed through Dr Broadbent and others than necessarily your response at that now. So just to be clear, at this point, in the information that was provided to you, no indication was made that the government would entertain paying a salary of 800 to 1.2 million with the provision of other...
It was a very high-level conversation, and the parameters were satisfactory to me. That was enough to proceed.
Thank you, Mr Webster. I might just check with my colleagues if they have any questions.
All been done from my end. John?
Mr Webster, I might just ask more generally about the role you're performing. When I've asked businesses where this assistance has been valuable, one of the areas that has indicated it's been very helpful is the university sector, and in fact they single you out as the person who's been of specific assistance. Is that an area that you specialise in, or why is it that they would specifically be finding you helpful or your role helpful?
Because I personally account manage the universities from New South Wales.
Just say that again.
It's part of our export.
Mr Webster, sorry, I'm just going to jump in. You cut out a little bit there, and just for the purposes of Hansard, if you could just go back and restate what you've said from the start.
So I personally account manage all of the universities from New South Wales with their international promotion activities in UK and Europe. It's part of my role within the sectors we split across the team. Operationally, the universities land with me.
And what other...
That's why they personally would have a relationship with me in that regard.
Thank you.
However, they have also been supported by many members of the team.
Thank you. And what sectors do you are allocated towards you in this current role?
Education specifically is the one I look after. The other sectors based on Investment New South Wales strategic priorities are aligned to our operational staff based on their expertise and previous experience.
Yep. And is there a division in particular about what you would be dealing with compared to, say, Mr Cartwright?
Mine are more operational matters. Mr Cartwright's are certainly more strategic.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you, just to, again, in respect to your current responsibilities, Mr Webster, are you currently assisting the New South Wales government with any ministerial visit?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Are you assisting Treasurer Keane in a visit to the United Kingdom or Europe?
It's not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, thank you. I think we're done.
Okay, thank you, Mr Webster. I'm assuming the government doesn't have any questions either, Scott or Peter? No. Okay, thank you very much once again for agreeing to appear before the committee at what is not the best time, I understand, for you on a Sunday evening, but I really appreciate that, Mr Webster. I don't believe you took any questions on notice, and if the committee does have any further questions for you, the Secretariat will be in touch about those. So thank you very much. That's the end of today's hearing.